Welcome back, everybody, to the Tennessee Titans franchise here on Madden 23. Today, we have got the draft preview here for the 2026 NFL Draft. In the last episode, we went over the first portion of the offseason, so that is the recap of the Super Bowl, going over staff changes, retirement, re-signings, and, of course, free agency. Our Titans had a whole lot of money to spend, over $220 million, and we used a whole lot of it. We re-signed guys like Kyle Pitts, Caleb Farley, Kevin Byard, Nate Davis, Chidobe Awuzie, James Daniels, and more to big contracts. We spent wisely in free agency, adding pieces such as Jaquan Brisker, Garrett Wilson, Daniel Carlson, and others. Along with free agency, we were also pretty active on the trade market as well, which I'll get into in a second. But first, we'll take a look at the rest of free agency real quick, some of the notable movements. Christian McCaffrey to the Broncos, Dalvin Cook to the Pats, Debo to the Colts, Christian Kirk to the Packers, DJ Moore goes back to the Panthers after a year in Houston. Russell Wilson is the starting quarterback of the Steelers. Juan Thornhill leaves Tennessee. He signs a deal with Buffalo. Baker Mayfield will back up Justin Tucker in Las Vegas. Desmond Ridder returns to the Washington Commanders, and those are the rest. As for the trades we made, we acquired Ed Oliver from the Buffalo Bills to add another piece up front on the defensive line, and we recouped some draft capital by trading Samson Jeuny to the Vikings for a fourth rounder. So that'll bring us to our draft preview today. Most of these guys we've gone over in prospect profiles, or we've talked about them in some way through the NCAA Next Up series. I feel like the top of this draft class isn't necessarily as talented as other ones we've had, particularly at the quarterback position. So because of that, we've had a lot more movement up and down the board, which has made things interesting. We don't have a ton of draft capital this year, but we do have our own first and second rounders. We've got 2 picks in the fourth, and we certainly have ammo to potentially trade up and down as we wish. Let's start off at the quarterback position, and obviously we will not be investing a high draft pick into quarterback because we drafted Romeo Coloci last year, who is really good. But I do want to go over some of the top quarterbacks in this class, and again, it is a slightly weaker group compared to what we've seen, but there are some good players here, and there are some guys who have risen up the board. Currently, Texas Tech quarterback Yahya Marshall is the top projected player at the position to be selected. Going into the season, Marshall was looked at as a potential day 2 pick, but obviously he was very good this season. He won the Heisman Trophy, leading Texas Tech to the college football playoff, and he was ultimately a little bit disappointing in that playoff game, throwing 3 interceptions in a loss to TCU. But nonetheless, I do feel like he has earned the opportunity to potentially be someone's franchise quarterback. I mean, he just checks off all the boxes. He's super accurate. He has a pretty strong arm, good enough athlete. He isn't going to wow you as a runner, but he is certainly capable. And I think he is ready to be a starting quarterback at the next level. I think he's going to be good enough right off the bat. He has shown far more polish than any quarterback in this class, and he's more well-rounded than any of these other guys. But I do want to mention some other players, and we'll start with the physical anomaly, Roddy Jolly out of Tennessee. 6'7", 240 pounds. This kid is built like an NBA power forward, but he plays quarterback. He's a dynamic runner. He has a super strong arm, and his accuracy and poise in the pocket really improved throughout the year. He's only a 1-year starter at Tennessee. Before that, he was the backup. And as the season went along, he definitely got better. And I think his stock overall has gone up. He could potentially be a first rounder. If there's a team who wants to take a shot on upside with Jolly over, say, Yahya Marshall, there is a world where he could be the top quarterback off the board. And then you've got Jay Jordan out of Michigan State, who opened the season as the top projected quarterback in the class. His stock has dropped a little bit, and it's not so much that he played poorly because he didn't. Jay Jordan was probably the best pure passer in all of college football. The thing is, as NFL teams watch him more, they're not entirely sure if his skill set can translate to the next level because he is a rock inside the pocket. He really lacks mobility, and that's a big issue. While he's got a strong arm and he's super accurate and he is a phenomenal passer, he doesn't necessarily fit the modern game. Not only does he not provide anything as a scrambler, but really just on passing plays in the pocket, he has a hard time of navigating through pressure, which is a big deal. If this was 30 years ago, he'd be the top quarterback off the board, but things have changed, as you can see. There are some other notable names down the board, including Levine Adamson. Kai Suggs-Gardner out of Washington. His stock went up quite a bit with a very good season, performing very well in the college football playoff. Vance Maximum, his stock also went up with Old Dominion. He had a great season. Marquise Harris, his stock rose a little bit. He was very good with Cal. Trey Davenport, the junior, entered the class, while guys like Rufus Motley and Cedric Chapman saw their stock fall a little bit. While the quarterback class is weak this year, the running back class is certainly not. And it's headlined by Mookie Davis out of Ohio State, who looks to be the top running back selected and the highest drafted one since Saquon Barkley. Obviously, a lot of the attention with Ohio State, who has now won 2 consecutive national championships, goes to the quarterback Puma Whitlock, and deservedly so, because he is awesome. But Mookie Davis is just as good. I voted Mookie Davis in first place for the Heisman Trophy this year. He averaged 8 yards a carry while being efficient and explosive. He's also an asset in the passing game. He's a good athlete. He tested pretty well at the Combine. I wish he ran a slightly faster time, but I do think he plays faster on film, so I don't think his 4.42 40 is going to be much of a concern for teams, and I think he very well could be a top 5 to 10 pick. I know teams don't really do that anymore with running backs, but Mookie Davis is just such a special talent. He might not be the only running back in the first round. Harrison Myers with Cal had a great season. Jayshawn Tate from Florida State started the year as the top projected running back in the class, but he did kind of fall off towards the second half of the year. Still very well could be a first rounder, though. Casey Aceron with Michigan, he was really good this year, along with Darius Edwards II out of Miami. I think we'll probably have somewhere between 3 and 5 running backs in the first round, which I know is quite rare, but it's a great group. Steve Redfield Kent is a dynamic weapon. Harry Stewart's stock rose. He played very well in the playoff. And some other names to watch out for include Ramir Conwell, Jelly McCluntz, Tyshawn Bankston, and others. Even with the undrafted guys, I really like Taquan Pugh out of Middle Tennessee State. Let's move over to wide receiver now, where Justice Everdeed out of Oregon finds himself as the top projected receiver in this class, but not by too wide of a margin. I think Everdeed has the highest ceiling amongst the receivers in the class. He was a 5-star freshman recruit with the Oregon Ducks, and he has lived up to the hype and then some, particularly over the last 2 years, where he has been a true vertical threat for the Oregon offense. He's got pretty good size. The speed is certainly what's going to pop out at you. 4.24, the fastest time of anybody at the Combine, and I think that number cemented himself as likely the first receiver off the board, but it's not a guarantee. You do have some guys whose stocks have really risen this year, including Trayon Scott out of Auburn. Going into the season, I think Scott was a fringe day 2, maybe early day 3 guy. As the season went along, his stock rose up, and then in the college football playoff, he exploded. He was one of the best players, period, throughout the college football playoff. He was also really good in the SEC championship, and he performed quite well at the Combine, too. He's been one of the biggest pre-draft risers over the last few months, and with a 4.28 40-yard dash, I think he has positioned himself to probably be the second receiver off the board and go in the first round with a high level of production this last season and athleticism. Kehani Mehalona from Cincinnati just entered the draft. I think he's an intriguing junior. But I do want to go over Racer Fox, the Fred Biletnikoff winner out of Washington. I think he's going to be your very steady slot receiver at the next level. Think Cooper Kupp, think Amon-Ra St. Brown, guys who can play in the slot but are more than that. They're shifty, they're dynamic. Now, Racer Fox does not have the speed that those guys do. He's a 4.6 40-yard dash guy. That's a low number. That could scare some teams off. And he may just end up being a true slot guy, which is fine. Maybe you don't want to draft that within the top 40 picks. But he showed a lot more than that playing in the slot and on the outside this year at Washington. We've seen some guys' stocks go up and down here at receiver throughout the year. Look at Wusus and Tellington, for example. Going into the season, Sammy Wusus was the top projected receiver in the entire draft, and he was a little bit disappointing, pushing himself down to a late second, early third round projection. And then Kyrese Tellington, on the other hand, he was a day 3 projection for most of the year, but he had a great season with Akron. He's got great size, great athleticism, tested well at the Combine. Tellington was very high on our board for day 3. We really liked him as a potential gem, but unfortunately, I don't think he makes it out of the second round anymore. I think he's really good. Some potential gems to watch out for here include Ashton Aluko. Jalen Douglas just entered the draft out of Maryland. I like Maverick Cherokee from Oregon. I like DeAndre Kyle from Boston College. I think a name really far to watch down the board is Ja'Cory Smoke out of San Jose State, a big sleeper projected to go in the 5th or 6th round. Let's move over to tight end now. It's a good tight end class. With us re-signing Kyle Pitts, we're not going to draft a tight end early, but I will briefly mention these guys. Orlando Slaughter out of Michigan State has become the top projected tight end in the class, passing Josh St. George. But I think both players will definitely end up being probably top 50 picks. Maybe one of them sneaks into the first round. Solid class at tight end, but don't expect us to go that route. I think the strongest position group in this class is offensive tackle. You've got 4 guys projected to go in the top 6 of this class. There are some phenomenal bookend left and right tackles. Ronchavius Anderson from Ohio State, his stock has risen so much over the past season plus, and he's a candidate to be the number 1 pick. Dejarius Roberson from Georgia, 5-star recruit. He's lived up to the hype. Julian Maine, Oswald Wiggold, all really good prospects, but we're not going to get our hands on those guys. I think looking a little bit down the board, maybe one of these tackles, like, say, Jake Trotter out of USC, I think he's just as good as some of these other highly regarded tackle prospects. In the previous prospect profile, I'm pretty sure I compared him to Lane Johnson, and I can really see it. With his athleticism at the right tackle position, maybe he's not as freaky as Lane Johnson, but you think a little bit of Lane Johnson when you see him, because Trutter's movement skills at his size is so impressive. He's very technically sound for an NFL rookie, and I think he'll be able to start right away at right tackle. A player whose stock has risen throughout the year at left tackle is Dakari Bonds out of Miami. When we last talked about him, he was looked at as a potential fringe first-rounder, probably more of a second-round guy. But he's had such a great season for Miami, and I have a hard time thinking he makes it out of the first round. While the Titans' offensive line was really good last year, particularly at the tackle positions, all of Tennessee's offensive linemen have had a hard time staying healthy. Last year, nobody played more than 15 games, so this team knows you got to have depth on the offensive line, and I think guys like Jake Trotter and Dakari Bonds will both very much be in consideration with Tennessee's first-round pick. While the tackle class is super strong, not just in the first round, but down the board, you've got some potential gems here late. Even in the undrafted range, Tom Uwe-Bariri, I think, could be a total steal in possibly the 7th round. And then at right tackle as well, Jalen Prater from Syracuse is a very intriguing player. He could sneak into the first round as well. Stone Utai is a player who I like too. And while the tackle class is really good, the interior class, not so much. The guards and centers in this class are certainly not as good, which is fine. The Titans do have a lot of talent on the interior, but again, those guys have had a hard time staying healthy with Tennessee, so I would not be surprised to see the Titans look at potentially a guard or a center pretty early in this draft class. If they were to look at one, I think the guy to watch out for is Georgia right guard Xavier Riedel, who's projected as a fringe first-rounder. Georgia has basically their whole starting offensive line in this draft class, which is crazy because their quarterback last year was not very good. But I think Xavier Riedel might be the best offensive line prospect of the Georgia Bulldogs, other than their left tackle, Dejarius Roberson, who could be the number 1 pick. I think Xavier Riedel could really slide into one of those guard spots for Tennessee. While they did sign Nate Davis and James Daniels to contract extensions, I'm not sure if that's going to stop them picking a guy like Xavier Riedel, because I think he could be good value at pick 30. And again, those guys have not been able to stay healthy with Tennessee, so it certainly does not hurt to add another guy who can play. The Titans roster does not really have many clear holes after addressing wide receiver and defensive back in free agency, so the Titans might be best suited drafting a 6th offensive lineman in the first round, because inevitably he's going to have to play at some point pretty early in the season for Tennessee with all of the injuries they've gotten consistently along the offensive line, not just last year, but really throughout the entire series as a whole. Let's move over to the defensive line now. We've got some pretty good pass rushers in this class, particularly at the defensive end spots, maybe not so much defensive tackle. We'll start with Okori Chibuke, who, when we last talked about him, he was a projected top 5 pick. I don't think he's going to go in the top 5 anymore. He'll still probably be a top half of the first round guy, but his stock has dipped a little bit. He was able to get some of his stock back with a great performance at the Combine, but his inconsistencies have scared teams a little bit. He's had some games where he's completely taken over, such as the matchup against Arizona where he had 10 tackles for loss, but he's also had some games where it feels like he's been completely silent. So he's going to need some refining, but I think he's got the size, length, and athleticism to be a really good pass rusher in the NFL. Then you've got Akin Fenwa out of Georgia. He was a very highly regarded recruit coming out of high school, mainly because of his size and athleticism, and he never really put the pieces together at Georgia. However, his stock has gone up since the end of the season because he's performed very well during the pre-draft process, at the combine, at pro days, at interviews. He has really impressed teams to where he probably will end up as a first rounder. I mean, look at these numbers. This is some ridiculous athleticism. Somebody's going to want to take a shot on him, even though he's really raw and he didn't live up to expectations in college. But the ceiling with him is so high if you can develop him. I like Thomas Fairbanks down the board out of Purdue. I think he's a pretty good player. And I think some of these other potential day 3 guys like Tuni Adeleye from UNLV, he could be pretty solid too. Let's move over to right end with more potential first rounders, including Frederick Swango out of LSU. With Okore Chibuke's stock dipping a little bit, Swango is now the top projected pass rusher in this year's class, and he might be the highest defensive player outside of some of the corners off the board in the first round of this year's draft. He's a pretty solid athlete, but it's really the production that puts him apart from some of these other defensive line prospects. He's better than just about any of these defensive linemen against the run, and he has a pretty solid pass rushing toolbox, which I think gives him a high floor. But I think he's also got a decently high ceiling as well with his length and athleticism. Maybe he's not as freaky as, say, Okore Chibuke or Akinfenwa, but I think he's not too far behind those guys. Then you've got Cedric Cabral out of Clemson. I don't know if there's anybody in the entire country who's had his stock rise higher than Cabral this year. He was the best defensive player in college football, and going into the playoff, he looked like a potential top 10 pick. He was a disappointment, though, in the playoff. He wasn't necessarily a no-show, but he didn't take over like, say, Adrian Moore, the Oklahoma defensive lineman last year who was a top 10 pick after dominating in the college football playoff. We didn't really get that from Cedric Cabral. He just looked like another good player on the field. I like Aziz Shakira out of East Carolina, another guy whose stock has gone up throughout the year. Maybe he sneaks into the first round. I think it's possible. And some interesting day 3 guys down the board as well. I like Javonte Knight a lot. Jojo Adeomola from TCU is a good player. I feel like throughout this series, we've never had a good interior defensive line class, and this year is no different. It's an underwhelming group. Reese Pritchett and Johnny Machado are both very solid prospects in their own right, but really nobody who wows me at defensive tackle. It's an average linebacker class. I don't think it's anything special, but I do think there are some good players here, and we will probably have multiple first-rounders amongst these linebackers. Raymond Leak from South Carolina had a great season. He passed Duke Hawkins as the top projected left outside linebacker in the class. Certainly a shot both of those guys go in the first round. I do think it's a really deep group. Madden, Byrne, Malloy, Lowen, Magaway, and Caleb Rogers are all potential very solid day 3 value selections. Looking at middle linebacker, we've got Alex Savage, the third out of Michigan. He's a big, freakishly athletic player who reminds scouts a lot of Giacomo Vivaro, who was the top inside linebacker drafted out of last year's class from Florida by the Arizona Cardinals. He ended up winning the Defensive Rookie of the Year. Scouts see a lot of him with Alex Savage. I don't think Savage has necessarily the quickness or the polish that Vivaro did, but I do think he is a very good prospect in his own right, and he should be able to contribute right away, and he could maybe win Defensive Rookie of the Year this season as well, as likely a mid-first round pick. He probably isn't in play for the Titans selection, which isn't a big deal because I don't think linebacker is a very big need for Tennessee. Parker Ashby, LaQuez Copeland, those guys are good players. I like Zayden Collier as well. Dayton Randall III from Alabama is an intriguing player as well. And then Michael Merriman from South Carolina, 5'9", 260, has a very interesting build. Let's go to right outside linebacker now. One of the top declaring underclassmen in this year's draft is Cletus Buxton out of North Carolina, who has passed over guys like Chavani Malumbe and Boaz Hoffman as the top projected right outside linebacker in the class. And that's because I think Buxton has a little bit more production than those guys, and I think he's also a little bit more well-rounded. Buxton is sort of a jack of all trades, master of none. You can line him up just about anywhere, whether it's off ball or as an edge, especially if he adds some bulk. He tested pretty well at the combine. I wish the 40 time was a little bit faster. And that's sort of the question with Buxton. Will he be able to cover these super fast tight ends and running backs in open space? But other than that, I think he's really good. I think it's also a deep group of guys like Henrik Vastbinder and Adrian Anderson, both very solid players. Let's move over to cornerback now, and it is a loaded corner class. We're going to see probably 7 or 8 guys off the board in the first round, and it's a deep group as well. Tennessee's got a good secondary, but an older secondary, so I don't think I would be too surprised if they look to draft a DB early, especially this year when there's so many good ones. I don't think the Titans will get their hands on Melly Golden, though, because he's probably the best prospect, regardless of position, in the entire class. Another guy who could very well be the number 1 overall pick. I mean, he is the perfect cornerback prospect. We saw Sauce Gardner come out of Cincinnati a few years ago, and he's obviously turned into a great pro. Melly Golden might be even better. He's big, he's tough, he's physical, he's pretty good in run support, very good athlete, very good ball skills. He's not going to be the only super highly drafted corner in this series. A couple years ago, we had Jameer Jefferson Jr. from Ohio State as the 2nd overall pick to the Cardinals, and you could argue that Golden might be an even better prospect than Jameer Jefferson, hence why he very well could be the number 1 pick to the Houston Texans. He's not going to be the only corner who goes early, though. Once he's gone, I think we're going to see an early run, and that'll start with Kalani Smith-Gardner out of Troy. He will likely be the highest drafted underclassman player in this year's draft. The Troy product has been phenomenal for the Trojans over the last 3 seasons. Again, he checks off all the boxes. Phenomenal production, very solid athlete, very good size. The ball skills are just as good as Melly Golden's, and he had a pretty solid combine and pro day, passing up some of these great corners in this class as likely the 2nd one off the board, and a guy who probably hears his name called inside the top 10. Very rare for a Troy player, but he is that caliber of corner. He was originally a Power 5 recruit, transferred out to Troy, and I don't think it really could have worked out too much better for him. After him, you've got some more really good players like Shante Cooks, Derek Thompson, Leonidas Mitchell, all projected top 15 picks. Cheetah Abdelani is really good as well. But I want to look a little bit further down the board at guys who the Titans could eye up with their first rounder, and that starts with Ayo Oguga out of Alabama. I think the Titans are going to like Oguga a lot because I think he's going to be ready to go. With Chidobe Awuzie coming back, who wasn't necessarily supposed to come back, I'm not entirely sure how Oguga will be able to see the field as a rookie, but he's a really polished player. He doesn't necessarily come with elite size or elite athleticism, but he's an all-around good corner who's going to be able to produce as a rookie. We do have a few corners whose stocks have really gone up with very good performances in the college football playoff, and that starts with Josh Parks out of TCU. Parks had a crazy pick 6 in the 2nd round against Texas Tech and Heisman quarterback Yahya Marshall. Josh Parks was on the TCU national championship team 2 years ago as their number 4 corner. He was able to learn behind future NFL DBs, and over the last 2 years as a starter, he's been a really good player, and he has seen his stock go up and up and up to where now he probably ends up in the 1st round. Again, very much in play for the Titans pick at 30. Another guy who's going to be ready to go. He's polished. He played really well in the playoff for the most part. He wasn't great against Ohio State in the Final Four, but to be fair, nobody on TCU played well in that game. He's not the only college football playoff corner to see his stock go up. Davis Slater out of Washington was also really good throughout the playoff. Another guy who's an experienced player. He's been with the Washington program for a little while, a 4-year starter at the position, and he's gotten better and better each year to where he's been one of the best defensive players in the Pac-12 and was a big part in Washington's run to the national championship this past season. This is another player who will absolutely be in play for the Titans' top draft pick at number 30 overall, again, assuming they stay there and they don't move up or down. I think Oguga, Parks, and Slater would all be very good selections at pick 30. It is a deep cornerback class. If the Titans want to wait, they can. Malachi Fultz, Utavis Kojiemi, Steve Stifler, all very good players. Ignacio Casanova performed really well at the Combine. He's a name to watch out for. And then on day 3, guys like Yaounde Moutier, Kenny Nababatada, very solid players. Even in the undrafted range, I like Colin McCain out of Toledo quite a bit. Let's move over to safety now. I thought the Titans would look at safety in this year's draft, but with bringing back Kevin Byard and now signing Jaquan Brisker, I think it is a lot less likely. It is a good safety class, though. I still think there is a shot the Titans could look at one of these guys. At free safety, Elijah Fox from Duke will probably be the highest drafted safety in this class. Khalil Diop and Marceau Rome are very solid prospects as well. Terry McMichaels, Pooh Trevins Jr., very good group. And then at strong safety, Gavin Wilkenwiski from USC is a super fun player. Pradyuman Singh out of the UTSA, his stock has really gone up over the last year or so. Santo Irving, very good athlete. He's done Stromboli. He's got linebacker and safety versatility. It is a really fun safety class. I think the Titans still probably end up drafting one despite the addition of Jaquan Brisker. So that's the draft class. It's a really fun group, a very unique group of players. And I think while this class isn't necessarily as top-heavy as some of the other ones we've had in this series, it is really deep. Hence why we've seen a lot more movement up and down the board this year compared to other years. Let's take a look at the most recent mock draft. Take a look at what is expected in the first round. They had the Texans picking Melly Golden, number 1 overall. Since there's not a quarterback in this draft, it's pretty unclear what happens at number 1. I could see the Texans going with one of the offensive tackles. If they're smart, they trade back and get more picks, but it takes 2 to tango. Somebody's going to have to want to move up, which is a lot easier said than done. They have Xavier Riedel going to pick 11. He's a guy to watch out for the Titans at pick 30. I don't think he ends up going at 11, but I've been wrong before. I really like Mookie Davis to the Arizona Cardinals. They've done a great job of building up their young core, and I think Mookie Davis would be so much fun there. Getting close to our pick, you may notice the first quarterback go off the board, and it's not Yaya Marshall or Roddy Jolly. It's Jay Jordan going to the Packers. I think that'd be a pretty stupid pick for them because Genesis Moon was really good last year. And then they have us picking Ayo Oguga, the corner from Alabama. That's probably one of the only picks in this first round that actually makes sense. A lot of them are not very good, but as we know, EA is not necessarily the brightest. Again, this is what our draft capital looks like over the next 2 years. We do have room to move up and down. We probably can't move up higher than like 20, but I'm not sure there's a player really worth trading up for in this class unless one of the top prospects really slips. Because again, this class has more depth per se than top-heavy guys. I think more teams are going to want to move down than move up, so it might cost a little bit less than in recent years to potentially move up to acquire players. So it'll be interesting to see how it all unfolds. I'm really curious to see what happens with the quarterbacks, how many go in the first round, if any, and if so, where. There aren't many teams who very clearly need quarterbacks at this moment, so it'll be interesting to see what happens. I'm really excited to watch it all unfold, and I hope you guys are as well. The next episode will be the 2026 NFL Draft. It will be premiering on the channel within the next couple of days, probably Tuesday or Wednesday. I'm not entirely sure officially of the date yet, but that'll wrap up the episode. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Peace out. Tighten up.